Welcome to the Shadow MPC with Clive Owen LLP, Recognition PR and the Northern Echo. In this session we regularly talk to business leaders from different sectors about what their business outlook's like and how they think the real Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee should act on the issue of interest rates. The background is mixed. Inflation's fallen a little but is still nowhere near the Bank of England's target of 2%. Growth is minute but not negative based on the latest data. Interest rates are at 3.5% and are in line with trends across the world. And as a result, the pound is trading at $1.24, around 10 cents less than this time last year, but considerably more than its low in September 22. Public borrowing is the highest it's ever been, but last month, despite record borrowing figures, it was £2 billion less than budgeted. And finally, an interesting action by the Bank of Canada, which decided to put interest rates on what it described as a conditional pause after a 0.25% rise. Now, it wants to give time for interest rate policy to do its job and to reduce inflation. Should our Bank of England do something similar? Let's meet our guests, including a couple of new faces today, and hear what they have to say about their businesses and their views on the economy they're trading in. And in the end, we'll have a vote to see if they think interest rates should rise, fall, or be conditionally paused at the rate they are now. So who are we going to start with? We've got a lot of guests here. Let's start with Katrina Lingwood. Katrina is from the Constructing Excellence organisation in the North East. Construction really at the heart of many parts of our economy. So how do you see it at the moment, Katrina?
It's, as you said, it's a bit of a mixed bag, really, although there has been a slight increase in the sort of the positive area where we're coming from with regard to the economy. It isn't huge, and I think that it pretty much shows that in the construction output, where it's basically sort of a flat growth at the moment. I think obviously there's certain sectors that are doing better than others in the construction area. I think obviously things like infrastructure has had quite an increase towards the back end of last year. That has improved quite dramatically. And also with regard to non-housing repairs and maintenance as well, slight increase, but not as much as the infrastructure. There's been a bit of negativity, though. I think obviously things like personal housing repairs, things like that, that's actually dropped a little bit. And I think that's one of the things that I think has a huge impact with regard to the increase in energy prices and things like that. People are looking at it and deciding not to go ahead. They're worried about how they're going to afford with the cost of living and what have you. So I think that's one of the areas that has had a huge impact, and I think will continue into this year, 2023. So as I say, I think a very mixed bag at the moment, Katrina, with regard to the outputs and what have you.
The last couple of times you've been on, you have been worrying, the members rather have been worrying about the cost of supplies, bricks, cement, yes, that kind of thing, and the availability as well. Has that eased any?
Availability's better, but there has been, as you know, a huge increase in costs. I think it was about 50 by the end of 2022. There was a huge increase in cost, round about the sort of the 15% from the year previous. As I say, that is getting slightly better. Obviously, I think with regard to the cost of fuel going down slightly towards the back end of last year, that has obviously made a bit of a difference. I think that obviously availability with regard to stuff, I think in some areas we still have a bit of an issue. Things coming from Europe and what have you is still a bit of an issue going forward at the moment. But as I say, that it is an improvement on sort of like earlier in 2022.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's move to Nicola Bellaby from our co-hosts, Clive Owen LLP. Hello, Nicola. Where do you see it at the moment? What are your clients saying about the world?
The clients are still very, very busy, they say. So that's all good, but they're getting a little, I feel they're getting a little bit more cautious. They're reining in their spending. They're not quite sure what's going to happen. They're going to be faced with corporation tax rises next year. So it's like Katrina says, a bit of a mixed bag. retail, non-food retail, didn't seem to do so well before Christmas as they had hoped or as they had done. So there's definitely reining in on spending in the private sector for sure.
Retail was an unusual thing, wasn't it? Because a lot of the results from organisations like Next, the high street retailers, they produced surprisingly buoyant results for Christmas trading when experts had predicted a bit of a downturn this year.
Yeah, but I think our clients are obviously smaller than Next, and I think that they've struggled a little bit more before Christmas. And I'll still be voting for an increase 0.5% this time. It's a delicate balancing act between driving the high inflation out of the system and the risk of exacerbating the economic downturn. There's going to be a lot of pressure on business and individuals, I think, going forward.
Nicola, you've played your cards early. We'll come back to you, I'm sure. Let's move on to the next contributor, and let's move on to Martin Pullen. Martin's from FRP Advisory, and they deal with insolvencies and so on. Now, Martin, I know that you can be very gloomy sometimes, but maybe let's see if there's any kind of optimism from you. What's coming across your desk at the moment?
I would always start with the fact that good businesses and well-managed businesses survive difficulties. You know, people who have been around in business know that sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and you've got to be prepared for both, both economic outlooks. Yeah, at the moment it's tough. Certainly food and manufacturing have found it particularly tough. Really difficult to shelter yourself from the increase in sort of inflationary pressures on business, whether if you're exposed to the need for labour, and Brexit's caused a problem there, and the mass resignation, or exposed to high energy prices. That is really difficult. That said, I think that particularly if we look in the food supply chain into supermarkets, I've seen the big boys be more open to discussions and understanding that the pressures on price are real, and trying to work to support their suppliers, which I think is positive. That's conducive to a rescue environment, which is what I would always be supportive of. I think I echo some of the conversations in construction. Some sectors are okay, but I think there's some headwinds ahead. It's a really difficult balancing act, as Nicola said. The Bank of England, the same people they're trying to help with, who are harmed by these higher interest rates, by trying to control inflation. Interest rates going up is going to put more pressure on their mortgages and their spending. And I think there's a big chunk, because it's 1 in 5 mortgages are going to come out of their fixed rate this year. And they'll have seen rates at below 2.5%, I would imagine, last time they're fixed. And they're going to see that up at 5%. So
that statistic in itself, though, Martin, says that the interest rate policy really should take time to work. It is not. It used to be 10 years ago. You put interest rates up, and very quickly, within a few weeks, people felt it in their pockets. Spending contracted, and the inflationary effect or the deflationary effect was apparent. Now, with so many people on fixes, it takes longer, and maybe people rushing to raise rates should be doing what the Bank of Canada's doing, pausing to work out whether it's worked.
Yeah, well, without playing my cards early, I'm leaning towards that side on the basis that, if we look at what's driving inflation, it's energy costs and it's fuel. Now, fuel has fallen. We've seen oil and gas prices fall markedly to kind of pre-pandemic levels. But, because of the nature of the way that market works, we've got a year's worth of cycle really to go through until that starts feeding through. It's going to be tough for some businesses that are fixing during this period. I know there's some help from government, but they are going to be fixing their energy prices at a higher rate. But I do feel that we've seen a softening in consumer spending. What drove the increase in retail spend pre-Christmas was actually spending on basics, on food, etc. So, yeah, I think it's difficult. The things that are fueling inflation at the moment, I'm not sure in the kind of interest rate policy, which is quite a blunt instrument, is going to have the impact that we would like.
One quick question. Give me a quick answer, because there's lots of people to get through. If you have a business in difficulty now, it comes into your office, normally you will try and sell it, rescue it, get the business to continue, keep its staff, or you'll have to close it. Those are sort of the ways you'll go. Are you finding an appetite for people who want to rescue businesses? Are there investors out there who'll put the money in? What is the more likely destination of a distressed business now compared to maybe pre-pandemic?
If I look at the last 3 years, about just under 70% of the businesses I meet and see survive. Whether that be they need a little bit of support, they need something more significant, but the business itself doesn't go through any formal insolvency process. I would say that statistic over the next year is going to fall. I think more of the businesses we're seeing now have fought for 3 years. One direct described it to me. He said, I feel like I'm in the corner, I'm in a boxing match and I'm being hit and I can't get a punch off. As in, we've got inflationary pressures, we've got the challenges with staffing. They've been through COVID, which was a challenge for all of us, and they've kind of losing the energy. That said, there are businesses looking to consolidate. There's always people out there with liquidity. The haves, people who have got cash, will always do well in a recession, which is just the way of the world. But I do think there's certain sectors, because of the sector-specific challenges, I think it's going to be more difficult to find buyers for those businesses.
Thank you, Martin. Let's see if someone can cheer us up. Who are we going to go to next? Andrew Gilmore, active chartered financial planners, looks after people's personal wealth. Come on, Andrew. Your job is to lift the game here.
Thank you, Graham. Difficult job then. I would probably go some of the thoughts that have been said already in terms of it being a bit of a mixed bag. So that there is some positives in the industry that I'm in, financial services. With it hasn't had much media coverage, but the FTSE actually hit a record high on Friday the 13th in this January. So it got to 7,864, and year to date, markets globally have performed reasonably well, and the stock market does tend to be forward thinking. So that does give some indication that the rate increases that have been coming through have been working, and that the markets seem to be pricing in that things will get better, and that's the same in the US as well. In terms of more as a business, what we're seeing at the moment is we're seeing a lot of uncertainty with clients that are retired, needing a little bit more income because of the cost of living crisis. So obviously we're having to advise them. The interest rates rising have actually increased things like annuity rates, which has been a little bit of a positive compared to the stock market being down. So there are a number of areas which we advise in where one negative might bring about a positive as well.
There was one small positive. One of your senior guys, Carl Pemberton, had been campaigning that consultants particularly should be allowed to put more money into their pension without the penalty tax because they'd hit more than £1 million pension contributions over a lifetime. The government hinted that they were going to look at that, and that would free up some workforce, wouldn't it?
It would, yes. Yeah. Both lifetime allowance for pensions and annual allowances have both been reduced for a number of years now. And I know that there is a lot of talk of that in the media in terms of which way they may tackle that. And I think a change to either of those. The lifetime allowance used to be 1.8 million just over 10 years ago, and it's now just over 1 million. So it has been squeezed dramatically, and it does impact a lot of people that are saving for retirement over obviously working life.
Andrew, thank you. Moving on to our next person, I think we've got Tim Bailey there. Hello, Tim. Excite Architecture. You're obviously an architecture firm. Just remind us what kind of things you design and take projects on.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. We do a lot of work with residential development, commercial development, a considerable amount of refurbish and retrofit now, as well as new build. Okay,
so where do you see the market at the moment and maybe in the future? Because you're quite at the front end, really, aren't you, of economic activity?
Yeah, we certainly are. Yeah, in the context of today's conversation, I think that inflation has weighed extremely heavily on existing contracts, particularly longer term contracts where prices have shifted against their original tender price. That's a significant bite. I think that looking further forward, it's also the same issues also weighed heavily on investment decisions, particularly around early autumn last year, when really nobody knew what was going on, I think. And that's come through into the beginning of this year with still on balance a degree of uncertainty about what the next year or two might bring when it comes to new development decisions. I think the important thing from where we sit, as you suggest at the beginning of the process, is that inquiry levels are still high, but decision making is a lot longer than it ever used to be. And so there is the ability for people to have slightly false impression about what the quantum of work within a period might be, and we've got to watch for that. Because inflation is so important in making some of those decisions, because it's 12 and 24 months ahead that you might get a return on investment, then it's quite important that I think we address that today.
Okay. Let's move on to, thank you very much, come back to you in a minute, Tim. Let's move on next to Fergus Laird. Fergus is from Naylor's Gavin Black, that's on commercial property, and obviously offices and workshops, factories and so on. Fergus, what's happening in your sector?
Very similar, I concur with sort of what Tim and Katrina have been saying. So within the commercial property sector, I deal with commercial property investment. And it's fairly safe to say that since the mini budget, any new development in the region has more or less stopped. A lot of the new development, which would provide additional space for those, generally warehousing or offices, relied on the property yields being at a low rate, so sort of 4 3/4, 5%. That allowed commercial property development to take place. As soon as the mini budget took place, all these transactions that, well, not all of them, but a majority of the transactions that hadn't been given the green light were pulled. And certainly we've been involved in quite a large one where a certain amount of new product would be coming to the market. We're not going to see that now.
And the demand for the product is still there. It's just about the finance cost reducing the yield return.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So the demand is there. So where we're thinking things will go is, well, there's going to be more pressure on the existing stock now, and it's going to be harder for those occupiers to find decent quality product at relatively affordable rents. So there's going to be an upward pressure on rents as well from occupiers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very helpful, Fergus, thank you. And last person we're going to is from A.V. Dawson, obviously the Port of Middlesbrough. He's not on screen because there's a fault with his camera, but he can hear us loud and clear. John Young, so how's it going at the port? What do you see? You see lots of different elements of the economy, of course, different operators there. Tell me how it's feeling.
Hi, Graham. Yeah, I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag at this moment in time. There's certain areas of the business which aren't doing so well, such as automotive and the ships agency we've got. Conversely, we've got other areas such as port operations, which we do, and also property. We've got a big property portfolio. At this moment in time, we're almost at capacity. But I think, as Tim said previously, inflation is a real issue for us. Not just the cost of living for people, but also for materials inflation. And that's causing us to review future projects and consider if they're actually viable going forwards, Graham. So, yeah, I think inflation is a real issue, and it's something that we've got to tame.
Now, you're clearly an inflation. You were the last person speaking, so I'm going to start to change the subject and look at what you think the bank should do. If you were on the Bank of England shadow real monetary policy committee, would you go for a further rise in interest rates this month?
Yes, I would, and I'd be agreeing with Nicola on this one. I think a 50 basis point rise is appropriate at this moment in time. So
you'd be hitting 4% basic rate then, if you had your way?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, that's clear. You've stated your case clearly. Let's go back to our screen and just go pick off people round the screen. We've got two people who are going for a 0.5%, 0.5% rise. Is there anyone who would go for a rise but less? I would go for quarter, personally, because I'd like to see action. I'd like to slow the pace of rises down. But nevertheless, that's my view. Anyone else would go for a quarter? No, I'm clearly in the minority. Now, would anyone go to freeze rates now? Yeah, Martin. Yeah. And, there's three. Okay, so let's pick on Martin first.
Yeah, my feeling is that the factors that are driving inflation aren't going to be particularly impacted by the rate rise. And I think that we've seen consumer spending softening. We've seen spending move to essential items. I think a further rise will just greater pressure on those that can least afford it. And I'm not necessarily sure that's going to have much of an impact on inflation generally.
You're steering me away from a quarter point towards a freeze, I've got to say, Martin. Tim put his thumb up. Do you want to say something, Tim?
Yeah, my thumb went up all by itself, actually. But I'm in the 0.5% camp. I was reading just this morning in preparation that Andrew Bailey has suggested that rates shouldn't top out higher than 4.5, and that to me gives me a sort of sense that he thinks they may have to go up that high. I'd rather go in sizable steps to try and arrest that before it gets to that level. And therefore I'm in the 0.5% camp. Okay,
Fergus, you were on a freeze or were you on a reduction? What were you on, Fergus?
I was on a freeze, really, sort of agreeing with most of what Martin was saying. From where I'm seeing it, we need to see how the current position holds out, and I'd prefer to sit and wait.
Okay. We've heard Nicola's view. Katrina, where were you?
Not being able to find my unmute, sorry. I was with the freezer at the moment, and I think my reasoning is the fact that we need to wait, because at the moment we've got decreases in obviously fuel and energy coming down. I think that's been a huge impact on inflation previously to that, and I think that, to me, let's wait and see. Yes, I think it will probably have to rise a little bit more, but at the moment, I would suggest that we just wait, because we've had Christmas, we've had the various sort of like impacts with regard to other things. And I think we just need to wait a little bit longer. We need to increase people doing things in their own home. I think that was one of the biggest sort of downturns towards the back end of last year. And I think that people are very worried about the increasing costs. And I think increasing inflation when, as you say, mortgage rates are going to go up, then this will have an impact.
Okay, and we'll go to the money guy last. Where were you, Martin, on this? Not Martin, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I think I'd go 0.5 increase as well. Very similar to the comments made by Tim. I do think it's priced in, on markets have priced in a 0.5 increase, and that's what they're expecting. I do hope that those increases will reduce moving forward, though. So I think if we do a larger rise now, with it being expected, and then reduce and hopefully stop the increases over the next few months.
What would lean me to, I'm slightly on the fence, I'm going to vote in a minute, but what would lean me to a rise of 0.5 is the defence of the currency, because we don't want to see inflation imported because our currency declines, because the bank gets it wrong and goes too soft. What's your view on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of... I was reading an article this morning saying that markets feel it's a bit Goldilocks at the moment, that we're actually getting things right in terms of the way that we're increasing things. And that is my concern as well, that if we do not increase or not increase as much, I think it would potentially have a negative impact in a couple of areas of the market. And I think we might then need to accelerate again. So I would say, yeah, 0.5 is where I would stay at.
Okay, time for a show of hands. Those in favour of a 0.5% rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, including John. And those...
And me also.
Who did I miss? John, yes. So there's 4, including John.
Yeah.
So 4 in favour of a 0.5% rise. Those in favour of a freeze. 1, 2, 3. And I'm actually going to go for the rise, because actually the final compelling point about importing inflation. But I would say, and I wonder if other people voting for a rise would say the same, I would say the bank should go for a rise, but then tell the markets it's going to conditionally pause to see what the effect is, rather than going for every month as expecting a rise. To get there to 4% and then say to the general public, it's 4%, we're going to leave it for a couple of cycles to see what happens. Views on that?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough, Graham.
You'd say that? Views, yep. Nicola?
Yeah, I think that's what I'd like to see, Graham. I want this corner turning, really, and I think this hopefully will do that.
John and Andrew, John down first. You buy into that point, John?
Oh, sorry, Graham. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes, totally. I think that would be the right thing to do.
Andrew?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
And the precedent has been set by an international bank in a G7 country, the Bank of Canada. So the shadow MPC for the North East, in conjunction with the Northern Echo, is going for a final conditional pause. Once this rate rise is gone, they would recommend a half point rise up to 4% with a conditional pause. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Very interesting to talk to you, and we'll do another shadow MPC soon.